Hello. This is going to be a very deep discussion. I'm just going to start. Working with gods in a pagan path. um Honestly for me, it has to be that way for me. I have to work with a god or goddess, usually a goddess. I have to work with a god um in my path. And over the course of my pagan journey, which started at about, well, I always want to say 13 because that's when I was first exposed to it. But me personally, I really did not start researching it and taking it seriously until I was 15. So, and I'm 31 now and a half. So, when I was 15, I was in one of the darkest places I've ever been in my entire life because of external circumstances. And I knew that I didn't want any part of Christianity. And I had felt that way since I was about 13 or 14. And I looked into witchcraft and first Wicca. And Wicca was all about the god and the goddess. And I was like, well, that's not for me because I don't believe in God. Because I was very, very angry about what the Abrahamic God had done to me and his followers. So I practiced witchcraft for a long time, for like 4 years in there, without any gods at all. Excuse me. And it wasn't until I was about 19, I think 19, yeah, maybe, I might have been 18, where I started coming around on the idea of gods because I had been doing so much research on witchcraft at that point that I had kind of blown through my interests of herbalism and crystals, astrology, and tarot. And I wanted to move on to something else, so it took me to mythology, to stories of deities, right? And of course, initially for me, like pretty much everyone on the planet, it was Greco-Roman gods. Until I learned that the Greek and Roman gods were actually two separate gods, and that's a little bigger discussion. And then I had just had this aesthetic interest in India. And so I looked into those gods. And that's where I really started being like, whoa, there's something to these god stories. Even if they're just stories. And at the time, I firmly believed that still, that God was not real. And that, and even if he was real, we couldn't prove it. And that regardless of whether God is real or not, the stories about gods can be really helpful. They're parables. It's just like the Bible. Parts of the Bible can be very helpful. They teach you lessons, life lessons, and so does mythology. This video is going to be so choppy and unorganized, so if you follow me through it, thank you so much. So, I think, for example, people... Let's focus on the Greco-Roman myths, because that's what most of us are familiar with. I think a lot of people coming into witchcraft and Wicca and etc. might be a little like dumbfounded by the idea of following like Zeus, for example, and being like, well, why would I want to learn anything from Zeus's myths, regardless of whether I believe he's real or not? Because he did all these awful things, and he raped people and betrayed people and backstabbed people and all this. Well, first off, I would point you to the Bible. The Abrahamic God, Yahweh, or whatever you want to call him, Jehovah, he does the same things. He doesn't really ever rape anyone per se, unless you want to say he raped Mary, because we could definitely make that argument. But he is a very wrathful God, particularly in the Old Testament, right? He is angry as hell, pun intended. But he is very angry and very wrathful, and it's not until the New Testament that suddenly there's no reference to him being an Old Testament God at all. Suddenly he's very happy, full of joy and love and compassion and forgiveness, whereas before it was all about punishment. Which you could make an argument that that's actually two different gods, but that's a whole nother discussion as well about the Bible. Regardless, I would point you to the Bible and say God was, as a whole in that entire text, ain't really super great. Ain't super great. He's like tricking people into like, hey, you should kill your son. Just kill him. Oh, just kidding. Don't really kill him. It was a test. Like, that's messed up. Him sending waves of plagues onto people, killing innocent women and children, killing firstborn children if you didn't, slap sheep's blood over your door. Like, there's a lot of stories. A lot of stories where God's a little suspicious. So I would point that out. That Zeus is not the only god who has batshit crazy stories about them. But I think that those stories are necessary. I would not necessarily take those stories as truth. I know in Christianity, you take those stories as truth. Personally, I don't think that was the original intent of those stories being written. They're meant to be parables, which is a story that just teaches you a lesson. And by assigning a godhead, like an important figure in those stories, it makes those stories more impactful. Sorry, if you hear that, that's one of my cats playing with her little bell toy. Anywho, there is such precedence for parables in society, and I don't think it was until much later that people started taking that stuff so serious and saying, this is gospel, this is truth, this is what happened, these gods did this stuff. I don't think mythology as a whole is meant to be presented in that way or taken in that way. They're parables, they're lessons, they're stories. So I would not let, for example, Zeus, I would not let his myths deter you from going and having experiences with him or learning from him. His stories teach you tons of lessons, tons. And by the gods committing bad acts in stories, that teaches you maybe to not do those bad acts. So anywho, I digress. So yeah, initially I was very atheistic, kind of bled into agnosticism in my approach to the gods, and I know that a lot of people I think come that way as well. But over time, I still have a healthy level of agnosticism, I think, but at this point in my life, and for many years now, if you ask me, do you believe in God, or a God, or gods, I would say yes, I do. I do believe in God. Is God necessarily an actual figure out there somewhere? I don't know. But it does not matter. It doesn't matter if God is actually real or not. All that matters is does the concept of believing in gods better you as a person and help you get through this life and navigate it. And if the answer is yes, and you're not hurting anybody by believing in those gods or pressing your God stuff onto them, there's no problem. Believe in gods. It doesn't matter. So I believe in gods because of my own personal experiences with said gods. So for me, I initially delved into some Hinduism gods, some Vedic gods, and like Ganesha and Shiva were really big for me, and Murderkin, who is very similar to Morrigan, but a male, in my opinion, very similar. And then I got really into what a lot of people would argue are not gods, and as the Arthurian characters of literature. So I got really into Morgan Le Fay, and when I thought about it, I realized I had liked Morgan Le Fay since I was a child from that mini series where Helena Bonham Carter plays her. Anywho, I really vibed with Morgan Le Fay because she was always told, in the myths, her myths as well, her stories are very paradoxical, just like all these gods, just like the Abrahamic God. Very, very convoluted. She's a villainess, and then she's a priestess. She's healing Arthur. She's seducing Arthur. She's trying to kill Arthur. It's very complicated. And I think that, like the Bible, it's because those stories have been rewritten over and over and over and edited by so many different people with different agendas. But again, I feel like that just adds to the richness of a character when you have so many myths, be them positive or overwhelmingly good. The more you have, the richer the God, you know, because it helps inform us. But we can get into that later in a second about whether that really, if that matters or not, or if it's helpful or damaging to your view of a God. But I really delved into Morgan Le Fay, and so when I was like 18 or 19, my initial initiation ritual that I did for myself, I committed myself to honoring the earth, and who I was calling Gaia and Danu, like Gaia Danu. Which I didn't realize at the time was also very Roman of me, to take a god, especially a Celtic god, and merge it with a Greco-Roman god and literally push their names together, like Apollo Belenus. But that none of that is neither here nor there. So anywho, God, sometimes I swear I'm an air sign, and I'm not, you guys. I'm a water sign. But anyway, with 2 earth signs behind me. But anywho, the more I delved into Morgan Le Fay, the more I realized I want to talk to this chick. So, as I said, my initial initiation, I vowed to honor the earth. But I said along the way, I would love to have help from Shiva and Morgan Le Fay. And Shiva kind of came and went in my spiritual path pretty quickly. Like, it's not like I don't acknowledge him now, like, holla. But he is the transmuter of energy, the destructor. So he definitely came in and helped me clear deck for my new path in life. And then he went his way. That was his job. He literally just came in. He was like, oh, you invoked me? Okay, here you go. Boom, bitch. And then la la la. So Morgan Le Fay, though, and I developed such a deeper connection. And this was through shamanic work. When I say, like, me interacting with them, it was through shamanic work. It was through creative visualizations, which I know is controversial, where instead of having a shamanic experience where the visions are happening to you, you're actively creating them. You're using your imagination to work magic and to see the gods. And I think creative visualization and imagination is one of the most powerful tools we have in magic. It sparks your inner child, and it is literally like the stepping off point for shamanic experiences to happen to you, in my opinion, is to first start creating them, and then it just carries itself. Anywho, I really got into Morgan Le Fay, and then the more I started reading about her, the more I started realizing that character, along with the Lady of the Lake, who I was working with very heavily as well, and I called her Vivian from, like, the Mists of Avalon book and everything, where her name is, like, Vivian. I realized that they were, like, literary, what's the word I'm looking for? They were, like, literary guises of actual gods from mythology, from Celtic mythology. So I dug really hard into Celtic mythology and learned about that. And that's kind of where I've stayed ever since. But the reason I bring that up, actually, I don't know why I brought that up. But the reason I bring that up is because I found it to be incredibly enriching for me personally, like mentally, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, whatever. I found it very enriching for me to look into the gods from my own ancestry, my own, like, actual genetic ancestry, right? And I know that's not the case for everyone, but I think it's such a powerful thing to do. And I think it was very powerful for me because I was raised to really appreciate our Irish ancestry that we have in my family. Um, Even though we have mostly English ancestry in my family. But we do have some Irish and a little Scottish and a little Welsh. And I was raised to really appreciate that. So there was that. But then also I think it was important for me to follow back into my ancestors and look at their gods because I did not have positive experiences with my immediate family or my extended family, any of my family. So it was important for me, I think, psychologically to somehow redeem my lineage, to find some kind of positives in there somewhere. And for me, that was just going back to the myths of my lineage, which is Celtic. However, as I said before, I was also into Indian mythology. And when I say Indian, I mean India. Like, I do not use the term Indian to refer to any kind of Native American. That is like such a pet peeve of mine. So anywho, obviously I have no direct genetic lineage to India. However, it's something that I always felt a huge calling to. And it really started, I think, with watching Aladdin as a child. But then also being exposed to a Broadway musical called Bombay Dreams. And that soundtrack just, oh my gosh, it like blew my mind wide open as a kid and as a teen. And I obsessed on it and wanted to learn more about Indian aestheticism, mythology, day-to-day life, Arabic languages. It grew from India to like a lot of Persia, and the Ottoman Empire, but it really started with India for me. So obviously, I think that you can follow gods from any culture, regardless of what I know a lot of people say now, because there's a lot of like cultural appropriation conversations that we have now and cultural sensitivity, especially with white people. But I think as long as you're doing something earnestly, it's fine. Like, it's fine. The topic of cultural appropriation would be a totally different video, so I won't even get into that. However, you can follow gods from any tradition. And you don't have, like I said, you don't have to even believe that they're real. You can just use them as teaching tools, as stories, as fictional characters, and they will still help you. However, also, I think the more you delve into their stories, I think most people, not all people, but most people would start to discover that influences of them start to pop up more in your lives. You start to see them more, you dream about them, that they infiltrate your consciousness, and they seem to infiltrate your exterior world, not just your interior world. And once they start to influence the way you perceive your external world, that's when they start to seem so much more real, right? And of course, there's an argument for that psychologically. Like, we could go on and on about how they're not real, actually, and how you start to perpetuate their existence. But we won't go there. This is not a psychology video. However, I encourage people to dig into Deity and find what works for you. And don't feel like you have to stick with one culture. You can mix and match. I do. On my altar right now, upstairs, above us actually, I have Morgan Le Fay, Lady of the Lake, Ganesha, Odin, and Dagda, all on my altar. Specifically Morgan Le Fay and Lady of the Lake. So we have fictional literature characters represented, a Hindu god, a Norse god, and we have a Celtic god. That's fine. That is fine. You can follow you can follow Oshun. I almost said Shogun. You can follow Oshun, African goddess, and you can follow Pele, Hawaiian goddess. Together. It's fine. It is fine. Don't let anyone tell you that you cannot do that. You can do whatever feels right to you, whatever the gods however they approach you, however they speak to you, as long as they seem cohesive, you can do that. I promise. Hey, guys, I think we're at the end of the video. I did a quick rundown of my thoughts, scattered as they may be across this video for 20 minutes now. And I think I said everything I want to say. If not, I'll make another video. But regardless, gods can play such an important part on your path, an enriching part on your path. And don't get discouraged if you feel like they're not speaking to you. I know some people say, well, you have to let the gods pick you. That's not true. They might not. You can pick them yourself. And in my personal experience, usually it's deities that I'm just immediately attracted to, either from childhood when I was reading about them, or just immediately, like, I'm like, oh, that's cool, because they're associated with colors or animals or something that I like. Or sometimes I just see their name and I think, I'm drawn to you, and I don't know why. And then usually it's like some huge revelation, like, as to why, and it's mind-blowing, but that's magic. And then sometimes there are deities, there's been several instances over the years where I think a deity sounds really cool, and I'm like, I'm gonna work with you, and I approach them, and I just get like nothing, like nooch, nothing. Like, they will not give me the time of day, they will not acknowledge me, they're just like, girl, no, like, I have nothing to say to you, like, not in a mean way. They're just like, we have no reason to cross paths at this time, thank you so much. It happens. It's just like, I think a lot of people need to understand that working with the gods, and this is maybe one thing the myths do get right, that working with the gods can be a lot like working with people. It's a lot like if you've worked with other spirits, like Fae, any of the Fae, they can be very on and off, hot and cold, positive and negative, and it's the same thing to me. Because I think in paganism, it's important to remember, on a closing note, it's important to remember that gods are not solely positive beings like in the Abrahamic faiths. And remember, when we say the Abrahamic faiths, we mean faiths that follow like one God. So like Islam, Judaism, Zoroastrianism, Christianity, etc. Whereas in those stories, there's always like a good God and a devil, or Satan, or whatever. There's two opposing forces. In paganism, those forces are either not represented in a god at all, because those forces are just forces in the universe, negatives and positives, or they're represented both in one being. Like, a god can be very negative and very positive. And that's just like us. We are both good and bad, because those are just energies. Anywho, if you stayed here for this entire video, thank you so much. And leave a comment, and like this video, and subscribe, please, you guys. I would love to grow this channel more, and I would love to talk to you more about specific paths of paganism and specific gods, because that is really my jam. I love talking about deities and going into their stories, and I really love talking about different paths of paganism: voodoo, hoodoo, witchcraft, Wicca, Satru, druidry, shamanism, Obeah, a ton. Anywho, that is neither here nor there. Thank you so much. My mouth is so dry, I need water. Thank you. Like, subscribe, comment. Yes. Thank you so much. Bye.